Now, the Director General of the World Trade Organization, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, has challenged Nigeria's governors to rise above the status quo and embrace bold reforms in a world still reeling from the virus pandemic, high inflation, and economic vulnerabilities. Speaking at the 2023 induction for re-elected and newly elected state governors in Abuja today, the Nigeria's two-time former Minister of Finance and Economy emphasized the importance of nation building and highlighted key challenges and opportunities facing Nigeria within the global context. Arise correspondent Adeshwan Omoran caught up with the WTO Director General after her presentation for a chat. Take a listen.
Watch their debt profile. What specific measures can the governors implement to ensure careful control of their debt profiles and expenditure?
Well, I'm sure they are still doing it. During my time, we used to run a debt sustainability analysis for each state. So before you borrow, we would run the numbers to make sure you're able to service the debt. So what I would say to them is that they should ask the Debt Management Office to run their debt sustainability profile so that we'll know whether the revenues they have are capable of covering the debt service and still allowing them to pay salaries, pensions, and so on. So that's what they should do. You can keep on top of your debt profile by looking at your debt service to revenue ratio. And the Debt Management Office can help you do that.
Okay, you also raised concerns about few states generating revenue and heavy reliance on the government at the center. In what ways do you think that they can generate these revenues internally, and why is it so essential for them to do so alongside federal accounts?
Well, having states whose revenues are more than 70% dependent on federal FAC allocations, even though they're entitled to it. It's not very healthy at this time because the world is changing. The world is diversifying away from oil and gas. So that is our main source of revenue in this country. So if you don't look at your state and say, how can I diversify? By the time the federal government is no longer able to get the bulk of revenues from this oil and gas, then you will be left also stranded. So this is the time to start looking at internally generated revenue. And what can they do? Many states have a lot of entrepreneurial activity going on. I certainly know that some of the states with large cities, you have people running small and medium enterprises. But many of those activities are informal. Many of those businesses are informal. Now, what I'm suggesting to them is not to go and tax them immediately, no, to provide them services so they can grow, so that they can manage their businesses and then set sight a few years down the road, maybe 3 or 4 years, they can be properly registered, brought into the tax net, and that will enable them to tax those enterprises, not right away. And remember what I said. I said, if you want to tax people, you must provide them service. Exactly. You cannot be taxing them if your services are not good, so they have to do the two. There are other types of taxes on property, on land, which some states are already implementing, like Lagos State does that. They can also look at that and see to what extent. But again, I want to repeat, if you want to tax your citizens, they must get better service. No one will want to pay if services are not good.
Indeed. Why did you emphasize the need for states to publish information regarding Federation revenue allocation and their IGR? What benefits will this bring to the citizens?
The benefit is transparency. Many times states don't pay salaries, they don't pay teachers, they don't pay health workers, they don't pay pensions. And many people don't understand why. If you set a standard that you're a transparent governor every month, you publish the allocations you got from FAC, you publish your own internally generated revenue. We used to do that under Presidents Obasanjo and Jonathan when I was finance minister. We were doing it monthly. Then everybody in the state knows what did they get. Because some people hide behind the fact that they didn't get an allocation, and so publish it every month, let everybody know. If you didn't get, they will see it immediately that you are not given, then they won't blame you. If you got, they will know. So transparency helps to make good governance. and trust.
Indeed. You asked the governors to rise to the occasion. You've been finance minister. You understand the figures. When you look at the current realities in the country, would you honestly say that these governors can rise to the occasion?
There are two things about the current conjuncture. In my speech, I also said that the external factors in the world are militating against growth and development in many countries. So we have to look at the external environment. It's not very friendly at this time. But we also have to look at our own internal management. So you can't just leave it and say the external things are so bad, there's nothing I can do. Yes, that is true, and it's partly to blame. But also to blame is our own domestic management of our own resources. That just has to get better. It has to be more efficient, more effective. The little you have, manage it well. And then seek to see if you can generate resources from elsewhere. So yes, we do have part of our destiny in our own hands.
Thank you, ma'am. You also coined a new term. There's the Japa syndrome, which we are well aware of, where young Nigerians are fleeing the country in droves for what they term greener pastures in other parts of the world. But today I heard you say Kapa. Talk about that, Japa, Kapa.
Well, I will come to the new word I've coined. Look, Japa, many Nigerians say, I want to Japa. We have, in the past 4 years, 50,000 young Nigerians with technical skills who have gone to Canada, just Canada alone. Another 20,000 are expected in 2022. The British have just given visas to 16,000 Nigerians. If the number mounts, we may lose 100,000 within the next year or two. And if we keep doing that, how are we going to build this country? Now, like I said in my speech, I am not telling young Nigerians not to go. No, this is a free country. You go. What we need to do is, I'm telling leaders, to make the country more attractive so they can stay. So if you Japa, you will also Kappa. You will come back. That's my new word, Japa and then Kappa. I Japad and I Kapad to come and serve the country. So I'm encouraging young people to do that.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yeah.
We kind of have you now ask you about the debate on fuel subsidy and continued borrowing of this current administration. I wonder what your thoughts are. The World Bank has just said over the weekend that Nigeria has no option but to borrow to fund its deficit in its budget worth over 10 trillion naira. Do you think that we should keep borrowing? And what are your thoughts on subsidy removal?
Well, I think we should look at our fiscal deficit to look at that. We cannot continue to be borrowing, because the more you borrow, the more debt you have to service. So we really need to look internally to see what we can do. During my time, I'm not going to comment on fuel subsidy. We did our bit. At the time when we said it should go because it was fiscally unsustainable, it was opposed. And we were able to do only 50% of that under President Jonathan. Now everybody is talking of removing it, so I will leave it to those who are policymakers. I've done my time, to decide what is the best thing for the country. All I'm saying is that we need fiscal sustainability. And when we have oil revenues, the oil subsidy issue, we have oil theft, our revenues are not as high as they could be. The world outside is not very good, within which we are working with them. We need to do our homework and decide, how do we manage this situation? How do we manage it? Because we can't keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. It's not sustainable.
In other words, are you saying it doesn't make any economic sense to borrow to fund palliatives for subsidies, which is what the government is proposing?
I'm not saying that. And I've said my bit on what I want to say on fiscal sustainability. There are people running the country. They will deal with it.